Welcome to Damn Good Movie Memories with your host, Brian Davis. This podcast is the cure for your long commute and super boring workday. Hey there, it's Brian Davis, and for this week's episode, we're going to cover the movie Nancy Drew, Detective from 1938. The studio's Warner Brothers. Release date was November 19th, 1938. The running time, 66 minutes, and it was in black and white. Leonard Maltin from his classic movie guide gives it 2.5 out of 4 stars. He writes, Nancy investigates a wealthy woman's disappearance in this series debut film, with Bonita Granville's energetic performance scoring a bullseye. Now, as a kid, I read most of the Hardy Boys books, but often overlooked the Nancy Drew books. My mistake, because in my opinion, the Nancy Drew stories are often better, and she's a stronger character. Now, part of the reason I believe is because with the Hardy Boys, you have to share the plot with the two brothers equally. But with Nancy Drew, she's the main star, and while she has her friends that assist her, she's clearly leading the show. As for the 4 films starring Bonita Granville, I didn't actually discover these until a DVD set was released in 2007, which coincided with the promoting of the Emma Roberts film of the same year. Granville would be best known for her Nancy Drew films, though I did cover a film she appeared in that starred Alan Ladd and Veronica Lake called The Glass Key, and she does have a key role in that film. Yes, pun completely intended. Now, the Nancy Drew detective movie is based on the 1933 story The Password to Larkspur Lane, which was the 10th volume of the original Nancy Drew series of books. All right, let's get into the movie. So it opens with Nancy, played by Bonita Granville, introducing Mary Eldridge, a wealthy widow who decided to donate $250,000 to Nancy's high school. That $250,000 is roughly $5.5 million today. Mary also attended the all-girls school when she was younger. When Mary answers some of the girls' question about where the donation will be used for, they give her a unanimous answer.
Tomorrow morning, Mr. Hollister and I are meeting at Mr. Drew's office to arrange the legal details. The amount will be $250,000.
Miss Eldridge, the figure was 200,000.
I've changed my mind. As I understand it, you girls, acting as a committee, conducted a vote of the students to determine to what use this money should be put. Is that right?
Yes.
Well then, which is it to be? A new science building, a library, a fine arts building, or a new administration building?
A swimming pool!
Nancy's father, Carson Drew, played by John Little, is a well-respected attorney in town and a single father after Nancy's mother died when she was very young. Carson is hired by Mary to prepare the proper paperwork for her donation to the school. However, when it's time for her appointment with Carson, they get some surprising news from her financial planner, Hollister, played by Charles Trowbridge.
Well, I see the welcoming committee's on hand bright and early this morning.
Morning, Dad.
Morning, girls.
Look what we got from Miss Eldridge. Isn't it super?
Super, yeah. Very, very handsome. But don't you think it's rather a small gift for such a large donation?
Oh, it's not the size of the gift that counts. It's the sentiment it represents.
Oh, I see. Well, perhaps you should add that to the inscription.
Oh, Dad.
Girls, Miss Eldridge will be here in a moment. I think you'd better sit down. Nancy, I want you to make the presentation.
Oh, I don't think I should make all the speeches Miss Endearing. Oh, go ahead, Nancy. It'll be good experience if you're going to be a lawyer.
Oh, I didn't know you were planning to be a lawyer, Nancy.
I think every intelligent woman should have a career.
Morning, Mr. Hollister.
Good morning.
Where's Miss Eldridge?
Miss Eldridge is gone.
Gone? How come? Where?
I don't know. She called me early this morning to tell me that she was leaving town for a rest cure, and not to try to find her because she didn't want to be disturbed.
What about us?
And she made no mention of a donation?
Only that she regretted the necessity for leaving so suddenly.
Then we won't get our swimming pool.
Seems rather strange.
Mr. Hollister, didn't Miss Eldridge even say when she was coming back?
No, Nancy, she didn't. Oh, believe me, I am sorry this had to happen. I know how disappointed you must all feel. If Miss Eldridge has changed her mind, you must understand and make allowances. She has her eccentricities, and one of them is a great fear of ill health.
I see. Well, I guess there's nothing we can do about it then.
I'm afraid not. If I hear anything, I'll let you know.
Thanks, Hollister. Goodbye. Goodbye.
I bet she never intended to give us any money.
I bet she didn't
Oh,
either.
she won't come back. She's just a crazy old woman.
She's not. You mustn't say those things. You have to stick up for her because your grandmother went to school with her.
You probably knew all the time she was just bluffing.
Why, Teresa Lang.
Young ladies, we must look at it philosophically. After all, Brimwood has survived a great many years without a swimming pool.
Just the same, I'll prove Miss Eldridge meant what she said. I'll find her and get her to write a letter or something. You'll have to be a magician. Even if you do find her, she'll just figure full of hot air.
I think we'd better go. Come, Suzanne. Good day, Mr. Drew.
Good day.
She didn't wait a crazy old lady. Too.
Well, Nancy, looks like we've got a fruit bowl, doesn't it?
You think Miss Eldridge will come back, don't you, Dad?
I think it best if you forget all about Miss Eldridge. I wouldn't let her spoil my vacation. After all, you know, she did seem a little bit, eccentric.
Eccentric? I'll show you. All of you. I'll find Miss Eldridge if it takes me 100 million years.
And with that, it means Nancy is now on the case. If you've read the original Nancy Drew novels, this is the standard way the teen detective falls into her cases. While driving home, Nancy notices Dr. Spires, her family doctor. She notices that he drives past her. When she looks in the rearview mirror, she sees that Dr. Spires pulled over to the side of the road and then appears to be kidnapped by men in another car. When she gets home, she tells her father, and they end up getting a call from Dr. Spires. They then go to his home to hear the story.
There were two men in the car. I was blindfolded and driven to a house which appeared to be far out in the country. There was a patient, a woman with a dislocated shoulder which had been clumsily treated.
And you had no idea who she was?
No, but I'm sure she was being held against her will. I was watched every moment by the man who took me to the place where she was. He held a gun on me. Besides, the patient was unconscious, as if she'd been drugged.
Dr. Spires, was the patient an old lady?
Yes, Nancy, she was rather elderly.
Dad, I'll bet you 2380 that woman was Miss Eldridge.
You knew Mary Eldridge, Ray.
Oh, so many years since I've seen her. It might have been she, but I wouldn't swear.
Do you think you'd recognize that house again?
They were very careful I shouldn't see the outside. But from the inside, it was a sort of a large, old-fashioned place.
How long did you ride?
An hour, I should judge.
Well, assuming that you were traveling at the average speed of about 40 miles an hour.
That would make it at least 30 miles from here.
That's right, Nancy.
Oh, there was one other thing. As we drove into that place today, the man driving muttered bluebells to someone on guard. Evidently at a gate, for I remember a driveway.
Bluebells? That was probably a...
Password.
Yes, it must have been a password. Carson, I don't like the idea of getting involved in this, but I suppose we should turn it over to the police.
Yes, but what about their threat? These men are apt to cause you a lot of trouble.
I'm afraid I'll have to take that risk. Besides, you're a good lawyer, and, well, you can explain it to the police without jeopardizing me, can't you?
I suppose so. I'll try. Nancy, you wouldn't mind driving me over to police headquarters, would you?
Mind? Don't be eccentric. Come on.
When Nancy and Carson leave Dr. Spires' house, we see two men in a car across the street spying on Dr. Spires' house. Those two men decide to follow the Drews' car, which ends up at a police station. The Drews speak to Captain Tweedy, played by Frank Orth.
Now, you sure that's all there is? You know, sometimes it's the smallest fact or detail about a case that eventually leads to the apprehension of a criminal. Did you know that?
I did, Captain Tweedy. I heard your broadcast.
Another one of my fans, Mr. Drew. I've been getting a lot of letters about my broadcasting.
Have you any theories concerning that house, Captain?
Well, it's a strange story, Mr. Drew. It'll take a little thinking out. However, the place being so far out in the country, I'd say those crooks are running a gambling house. If I only knew who that old lady was.
But Nancy thinks it might be Miss Eldridge, Captain.
There's no proof.
It's easy to find out. Just look around the country in a radius of 30 or 40 miles till you find a big old-fashioned house. That's all you have to do.
That's all I have to do. I'm a busy man, little girl. There's hundreds, thousands of old-fashioned houses around here.
Well, I thought that...
Detective has to have more than that to go by.
Could you, work on the license plate number of the kidnapped car?
Do you know it?
I know the last part of it. 08.
08.
The rest of the plate was spattered with mud, so I couldn't read it.
Don't worry about that, little girl. 08. That's the kind of information that's valuable to a detective.
Are you sure you can find the car from those two numbers?
Am I sure? Listen, I round up every car that ends in 08 and I'll grab that machine. Just like that.
How many automobiles are there in the state, Captain Tweedy?
Oh, a couple of million. Why?
I was just thinking. That would be about 20,000 licenses ending in 08, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I guess.
And since you don't know the state in which the license was issued, you might have to look through about 400,000 or 500,000 cars before you found the right one. And you could do it just like that. My, that's wonderful.
Well, I guess we'd better be going.
I'm very glad to have met a real detective, Captain Tweedy.
Come, Nancy. Bye, Captain.
Goodbye.
Dad, remember that car with a dim headlight?
One you were kidding me about?
Yeah.
Well, what about it?
Well, just supposing that it was the kidnapped car, and just suppose that it had been following us all the way from Dr. Spire's house. What would you do?
Don't worry, Nancy. I'd think up something.
Well, you better start thinking. They're right behind us.
What?
Hold tight, Deb.
What are you doing?
I'm going to follow them for a change.
Nothing doing, young lady. This is getting too dangerous for you. We're going home, and you're going to keep out of the whole affair while you're in one piece. From now on, it's up to Captain Tweedy.
Captain Tweedy? I should say not. That conceited Tweet, what a character. I'll show him.
You'll do nothing of the kind. Now drive home.
But, Dad, what about my pride? He challenged me, actually threw down the gauntlet to me.
Well, let it lay, Nancy. Let it lay.
Of course, Nancy Drew can never let sleeping dogs lie because that would be an awful movie or book. Next, we meet Ted Nickerson, played by Frankie Thomas. Now, in the books, Ted is always called Ned. Also in the books, Nancy and Ned are basically dating. In the film, they sort of have a love-hate relationship. We also meet another neighborhood boy named Spud Murphy, who has found a carrier pigeon.
Oh, just look at it. You ruined it.
Oh, you can plant new flowers in the furrow I made.
Yes, and you could tackle that dummy in some other direction, couldn't you?
Well, that's the only place I can hang it. And I gotta keep in training for football.
Now get that thing out of here.
Gosh, it's an eternal mystery to me how anybody as smart as your father could raise such a dizzy daughter.
Why, Ted Nickerson,
Okay. It's not a mystery.
Where? Oh! Hey, Ted! Boy, look what I got here. Oh!
What's the matter?
Oh, my flower garden.
It's a pigeon. See, its wing's been broken.
Spud Murphy, that's cruel and inhuman to treat a poor, dumb, crippled creature that way.
Oh, he's not hurt that bad.
Oh, you poor little precious.
Poor precious. Poor.
He landed on my pigeon coop this morning, but he ain't mine.
Whoa, what do you expect me to do about it?
Well, I was thinking maybe you could broadcast over your radio sending set and find out who he belongs to.
Well, that's very honest and commendable of you, Spud. You should be rewarded.
Say, I might at that. He may belong to the United States government. He has a number on his leg.
Oh, he's a carrier pigeon.
Oh, that's right. Look, here's the thing the message goes in.
See, I never saw that before.
Yeah. Shoulder okay, bluebells.
What kind of drivel is that?
Bluebells, that's the password.
What password?
Ted, I've got to find out who owns this bird. Start your radio.
Oh, you don't have to do that. All racing pigeons are registered with the American Pigeon Association. Just send them this number. 221-12-12.
Gee, that's swell. Look, Ted, you take care of this pigeon till I get back. And don't you dare let anything happen to it.
What's the idea?
Right now, that bird's practically the most important thing in the world to me.
Why give me the bird?
Another noticeable difference in the book compared to the movie is how Benita Granville portrays Nancy. In the books, Nancy comes off as very calm, controlled, and methodical. In the movies, she's a little bit more hyper and super energetic. Nancy brings the pigeon evidence to her father, who doubles down on his orders to Nancy to stay away from the case. It was just reported in the news that Dr. Spires was badly beaten the night before, likely by the two men who followed the Drews. Carson tells Nancy to take the pigeon directly to Captain Tweedy. Yes, the irony of his last name being connected to that bird. Ted decides to make Nancy a crate to put the pigeon in to be delivered to Captain Tweedy. However, Nancy purposely pulls out of the driveway herky-jerky in order to have the crate fall out of the convertible, which of course breaks, and then the pigeon gets loose and flies away. This was all by design, as Nancy wanted to follow where the pigeon went. The pigeon eventually arrives at a large house. Nancy has Ted wait outside the house to see who lives there, and if the pigeon leaves the property again. In the meantime, Nancy goes to a drugstore to phone her father of the news that she believes she's found where Mary is being held. Carson calls the police, and they arrive at the house. The police raid the house, without a warrant, by the way, and they get another surprise.
They've got someone. Come on!
Hollister. Mr. Drew, will you explain to these men who I am?
Well, certainly. This gentleman is Miss Eldridge's business manager.
Oh, yeah?
Captain Tweedy, I'm afraid you've made a mistake.
I've made a mistake.
Mr. Hollister, I didn't know you lived here.
I only rented this place yesterday.
Why?
I like the country. Is there anything wrong with that? I must live somewhere until Miss Eldridge returns.
Well, who had the place before you got it?
The former tenant was a Mr. Tooker, but he's been gone a couple of months.
You know, I think there's something going on around here you don't know anything about. I'll have to dig up this Mr. Tooker and see what he's got to say for himself. Do you know what happened to him?
He died.
There's no one else in the house.
No one in back, Captain. Look, Mr. Drew, we drive out here 30 miles because you insist. And what happens? A wild goose chase. Now, that's a waste of the taxpayers' money.
Well, I can't understand it. I'm sure that Nancy wouldn't...
Pardon me, Mr. Drew. I think your daughter has hallucinations.
Captain Tweedy, would you mind telling me what this is all about?
Well, this kid got her mitts on a pigeon. It was carrying some kind of a message. She said it had something to do with your boss. She said the pigeon came here.
But I did see the pigeon land here.
Yeah, so did I, right out back.
Excuse me, Mr. Pigeon. Hollister. Have you got pigeons?
Yes, there are pigeons here. They belong to the owner. If they have anything to do with Miss Eldridge, I certainly think we should investigate. Which one is it, Nancy?
I can tell it because its wing has been hurt. I don't see it. Do you, Ted?
No, I don't either.
It's not here.
I thought so.
Nancy, are you positive you saw that pigeon stop at this house?
I'm practically positive.
So, your daughter's a detective, is she, Drew? Well, the police have got a lot of other things to do besides running around playing kids' games. We follow any more of these phony leads, we'll wind up skipping rope. Now, little girl, you'd better go back to the kindergarten and play with your dolly. Psychopathic case.
I'm awfully sorry, Mr. Hollister.
That's all right, Nancy.
Good day, Hollister.
Good day, Drew.
Come along,
Forget
Nancy.
it.
Goodbye, sir.
Goodbye, son.
From that last clip, this is also another example of the difference between the movie and the book. In almost all of the books, the police are often eager to get clues from Nancy and never mock her detective skills. Another note that housekeeper Effie is not affectionate at all, as opposed to the books where Hannah the housekeeper is like one of the family and a pseudo-mother to Nancy. In any case, Nancy's intuition was correct, as Hollister isn't as innocent as he claims to be. He writes a note that says, "Drew kid brought the cops here. Convinced police there was a mistake. Cops sore about the wild goose chase." He then folds the note carefully, puts it in a small container, grabs another pigeon, and places the canister in its holster and sends it away. Alright, there's about 30 minutes left and plenty of mystery to uncover, including who really kidnapped Mary Eldridge and why. As you likely know already, Nancy always solves the case, but that's not the point. It's the ride getting there that is enjoyable. I will say these early films are fun, but not nearly as good as the original novels. And while you might think these books were just kids' books, frankly, if you reread them today, you'd be hard-pressed to think that today's youth would actually understand most of the verbiage written, which shows the sad state of today's reading youth. So, enjoy the films, go check out the books if you want some quick, fun reads, and you can find this full movie on YouTube for free. All right, a fun fact. When Nancy says to her father, "I'll bet you $23.80," well, that refers to the amount of the weekly paycheck given to the WPA workers, that was Works Progress Administration, during the Depression and Roosevelt's New Deal. It became an amount often used when jokingly betting someone to emphasize a large amount. All right, we have a special guest, and that is Lindsay, who of course read the Nancy Drew books back in the day, but she had never seen the films. So let's get her fresh take on this film, and then I'll be back next week to talk about yet another random movie from my DVD collection. Okay, we're back with our very own crime fighter, Lindsay. Welcome back.
Hey, Brian. Hey, everyone. Very happy to be here. I enjoy a good crime story.
Yes, you do. And that's pretty much the podcast you listen to. It's the Netflix shows you watch. This is all, but this is a little bit more, I don't know, tame.
Yeah. I mean, the true crime genre can go a lot of ways, and I've probably watched it go every way to Sunday. So this is on the tamer side. I would agree.
Before we get into the film, so did you actually read the books when you were a kid?
Yes, I did read the books when I was a kid, and I loved Nancy Drew. I thought that she was like one of those aspirational figures, like she was smart and always solving capers, and I love Nancy Drew. I have always been a fan since childhood.
So one of the things I noticed, I actually prefer, usually it's supposed to go the other way, Nancy Drew over the Hardy Boys. Not that I didn't like the Hardy Boys, but you had to, with the Hardy Boys, you had to split time between Joe and Frank, whereas with Nancy Drew, she's kind of like the main star here, so a lot of the stuff she's doing on her own. Now, she has her friends, but not as much here, so one thing, I don't mind Benita Granville as Nancy Drew, but she almost seemed more, I don't want to say childlike, but she was impetuous a lot of times. Like there's a lot of like over emotion that the novel Nancy Drew always seems to be in control of her emotions. How did you feel about Benita Granville playing Nancy Drew in the film?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like there was a petulance to her behavior. I don't want to go so far as to say there were moments where it was a little spoiled rich girl-esque, Daddy was a successful attorney. Mm-hmm. They had a lovely home. She was obviously going to a very expensive seeming and prestigious private school, which is how the film starts, right?
Yep.
So is this donation that is supposed to be happening from a wealthy heiress in town to the school.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I guess when I think of Nancy Drew, at least from the books when I was reading, I kind of thought of her as a little more, not an outcast, but she was a little maybe odd in a way. Like, I don't picture this kind of girl of privilege from the story. She was maybe a little rough around the edges. I guess there was a precociousness to her, and that makes sense for someone being inquisitive and kind of snooping around and trying to find the dirt and
Sure.
what's going on. But there did seem to be something that was a little more almost intelligent, or I don't know. There was a difference. I like Benita Granville a lot.
Yeah.
It was just a different vibe. She seemed a little more kind of popular girl in high schoolish doing this. That was not what I got from the books.
Yeah, and maybe that was the direction they gave her, too. It's possible they wanted to take her in that direction, because maybe that's of the era. The other thing that was totally different is the relationship between her and, quote-unquote, Ted. His name's Ned in the books. Like, that is her boyfriend in the books. Now, they always have a nice relationship. They're never kind of adversaries. But in this movie, it's almost kind of like, you can tell they like each other, but they're almost exasperated with each other. But he always agrees to help her anytime
Yeah,
he
she's
asks.
kind of like mean to him, or like expectant of help with him. And it seems like the classic, boys kick me because they like me, or vice versa, and I have to admit, I don't remember her boyfriend from the books per se.
Right.
But I would feel like that dynamic might make more sense than this one. Although this one seems very Hollywood to me.
Yeah. Well, in the books, and maybe it's because these books were written in the 30s, they say it's her boy suitor, but they're they really don't...
Sooner?
Yeah.
Wow.
They don't have really a lot of romantic angles in the... Like, they pretty much play it straight in the books. Like, it's a mystery. You can tell she likes Ned. Ned likes her. But they go to dances and things like that. But it's always about the mystery. And part of that, I mean, look, these books are only 170 pages long or something like that. So, yeah, maybe there's almost more of a... there was not much romance in this one either. But you could tell they like each other.
I mean, this film was made in 1938. Is that right?
Yeah, it's only 66 minutes, so...
It seems crazy to me that this was in the 30s, because I'm trying to remember in my mind when I was young, when did I think, if I even thought about this, the Nancy Drew books were written?
Yeah.
I wonder when they were. I'm sort of
in the 30s.
Stunned saying it, that they were from the 30s.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't seem like they would be that old. Now, maybe that's just because when you're a kid... You don't have an appreciation of time in that way.
Right.
Like, I'm not picking up that series of books and going, oh my God, this is from the 30s.
Well, they are timeless. Many. Yeah.
But it's interesting because the film seems very 30s, but the books didn't.
Well, that's the great part about books and audio. In your mind, you can
write the story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's certain things that are dated. Like, obviously, like technology is going to throw things off. But, this book, this particular story is based on the 1933 novel, The Password to Larkspur Lane. So, 1933.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I think the books... Now, keep in mind, if you're reading Nancy Drew books today, they were revised, I think, in the 50s. So certain terms and things were revised. Some of the plots, I think, were revised a little bit. So maybe that's part of it. Yeah.
To give listeners perspective, though, there's an entire section of the plot. And again, I'm not going to... One time you accused me of giving something away. I'm not doing it.
You usually don't do that.
But there's an entire section of this plot that is dedicated... to
the pigeon,
carrier pigeons,
which is kind of awesome.
Let's just sit on that for a second. An entire section of the plot that is dedicated to the idea of sharing information via carrier pigeon.
Right.
I mean, pigeon.
But we looked it up because you're like, do they really do that? Yes, they do, and they still do in certain parts of the world,
which is pretty stunning.
Yeah.
Because you can't really get a big message on this pigeon either.
No.
And it's just so surreal to me to be in the time that we're in right now, and then watching this and realizing that was a mode of communication. Like, that was legit. So that was a little crazy. I think some of the other things in the film didn't stick out as much
but that did.
As that, other than maybe even the clothes. Like, I was really happy when there was a scene that Nancy ended up following the boyfriend. Is his name Ted in this?
Ted in this.
Ned in the book.
In that book.
So Nancy and Ted, for her safety, let's say, go on vacation with Ted's family because it kind of gets her to a quote-unquote safe place. Yeah. And I love the scene. I was kind of jealous of the outfit, where she's like wearing a blouse and pants.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God. She's wearing pants. I thought that was great. I mean, I almost didn't think that would be in the film. It was like a very high-waisted pair of Palazzo pants, which is funny because they've come back. I mean, that's a very popular style, but I thought it was cool. It seemed oddly modern. So there's these little touches that make you forget it's 1938, but then you're like, oh yeah, the pigeons. Like, never mind.
But I'm telling you now, let's say you wanted to really... Because with the internet, everything can be traced. I mean, they say no, but it can be. You could use a carrier pigeon to really send important notes if you really didn't want to be traced.
I mean, somebody must be doing that.
I mean, it might not be a bad idea.
Hey, I mean...
So yeah, it seems kind of antiquated, but they got the job done.
I mean, look, there's nothing that can't be monitored now. Yeah. But I don't know about a pigeon.
Nobody's going to monitor.
I don't know if anybody's watching
pigeon.
a pigeon.
Okay, so did you like the story? I mean, what's nice about these, they almost run like an hour. You know, they're basically a TV episode. So even if you don't like them, they're not going to waste your time. They get a lot packed in basically an hour.
I liked it better than I thought I would. I mean, again, I sort of say this cautionarily every time we're talking about a much older film, which, you know, to be honest with the audience, and I've said it several times, I'm not very well versed in older film. Many, if not every single one, and probably for the sake of this podcast, let's go with every single one of these movies I have never seen before watching them to have this conversation with you.
Which is fun.
So, and it is fun. But I actually like this. I don't want any of the comments I made earlier to be disparaging to the film or how I felt about it. I actually thought it looked really nice, even though this one is totally in black and white. The setting in which they lived and the places in which they were visiting, I'm very taken by how they look. And me personally, it's like I wish I could just drop myself in that space and place. I thought it looked lovely, and it felt warm and inviting in some way. And these older films all kind of feel like a simpler time to me, and I mean that in the best way possible. Like, I'm watching this one and thinking about what it would have been like to have been a teenager at that time, because there's a scene early in the film where Nancy and all her friends are gathered around at her dad's office when they think that this donation is coming in to benefit the girls' school. And I don't know, it just seemed like easier. I'm sure it wasn't. I'm sure being a teenager in any decade, probably at any time ever, was probably hard. But looking back then, for whatever reason, when I see these types of films, this is like everything from maybe the 30s to the 60s, let's say, it just seemed easier and better. Like, if I could have done it over again, I would have liked to have done it in any one of those eras, you know?
As a female, possibly. As a male, maybe not so much, because if you're Ted's age at this time, in about a year or two, you're going off to World War II.
That's true, you're going to war.
So that is one thing that we forget, is pretty much from the late 1930s all the way through Vietnam in the 60s, there was some sort of military conflict going on.
That's true. And young men were signed up
That's right.
for that conflict, where young women were not.
I mean, they took care of the home front. I mean, absolutely.
And they worked during the war.
They absolutely did. And they were, vitally important, but...
They weren't on a battlefield. To my knowledge. That doesn't mean there was never any woman that was there. There's women, maybe there were female medic. I don't know.
But, Rosie the Riveter, that whole thing is absolutely valid.
Absolutely.
But yeah, when they say it was a simpler time, it was, but it wasn't.
Yeah, I guess it's maybe when I think of modern film versus older film, it's almost like you said in the past when we talked about this. Hollywood was an escape from what was going on for everyday life.
Yep.
So much of what they visually made and created then, even during these times of war, was almost meant to feel comforting and warm, kind of like a hug, you know? And
they didn't have TV back then.
Right.
You had radio.
So you didn't see as much film that had that raw, like, hard grit that you would see today, that people would voluntarily make films about this extremely tough thing. Now, one series that's on TV that I just haven't brought myself to watch yet, I know it's really good, I've heard amazing things about it, and I love indie everything, so it's not that I won't watch it, but I've kind of taken a pause on going into that series Euphoria, because it's certainly about young people, but it just sounds like the hardest thing in the world to watch. Like, you better be geared up to feel like you're getting punched in the face and the gut watching how difficult this is. I mean, that kind of thing would never get made back then, because it was not escapism, it was just a reminder of some of the tough stuff. So, in a way, this film felt like an escape from... something. It was a caper, but it was warm in a way.
I would say the best, modern revamping of Nancy Drew, even though it's not considered Nancy Drew, is Veronica Mars.
Right. Yeah.
That was a terrific series, a great movie.
People loved that. Yeah.
It was terrific. I mean, basically was the modern day Nancy Drew.
Yeah.
And Kristen Bell did a terrific job, and it's great characters, and she was a detective.
Yeah.
And that's, I think they did, if they were to take Nancy Drew today, I don't think you could have done it better than Veronica Mars.
Yeah, no. Yeah. I mean, I don't know much of the show. I didn't watch it religiously, but I know that it was good.
Worth watching.
I know that it was very well regarded, and it seemed like it was a good sort of play on Nancy Drew in a very kind of well done, respectful, intelligent, sharp way.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they made 3 more of these in the series with Benita Granville.
Why don't you think they ever went back to this, really? I mean, they really never did TV shows. There was a show in the 70s with the Hardy Boys and I think it was David Cassidy and Parker Stevenson, and there was, Nancy Drew too, but it wasn't that successful. So why don't you think this came back? I mean, we mentioned Veronica Mars, but they tried to actually do a Nancy Drew maybe about 5 years ago, but it was on the CW. They tried to make it almost like salacious, like Euphoria, and it's, they kind of missed the whole point of Nancy Drew.
So the question is more about why didn't they redo Nancy Drew?
Yeah, why couldn't they do a decent modern version in the spirit of the original novels?
That's a good question. I guess I really don't know why. I mean, I end up thinking about...
Is today's youth too dumb to get it?
No, I think that the drive has been more towards series like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, where you have a strong female lead who, I mean, let's be honest, has been to friggin' hell and back,
right?
And came back to kick some ass. You know what I mean? But I think
and that's the problem with today. Like,
it's changed.
Nancy Drew was a strong female lead that didn't have to get beat up to have a shitty wife. She could just be a strong woman and do her thing.
I mean, there's some scenes in whether you watch the European version, was it Swedish, or you watched the American version. There are some things in Girl with the Dragon Tattoo you can't unsee.
No.
And let me just say, not great. I wish I could unsee it. Not so good. I mean, amazing films, but very, very difficult moments in film to watch. Every now and again, there's something that you see in film where you're like, and I'll never get that out of my head. And even though this is a great film, I wish I could never, ever see that ever again. And that is one of the series that has some of those scenes. But I almost feel like it went more in that direction.
Yeah.
Of people trying, like strong female characters trying to...
Like, everything's got to be dark today.
Yeah, it's very dark.
It doesn't.
I don't know if it's like get revenge or solve crime or maybe all of the above, but it's much darker than this was. And you're right. Veronica Mars is the last thing that I can think of.
There's darkness in Veronica Mars.
Yeah, but that did a good job with this and kind of preserved some of the original spirit.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's going to be 3 more of these. Would you be interested in watching the next
I'd see them again. Yeah. I mean, again, just visually, from a visual standpoint, I really appreciated it. That's one of the things that's been kind of a joy for me watching these older films that I've been watching a lot of the last maybe 12, 13 months, right? Has been just the nostalgia of seeing those things. I think that I consider myself a very nostalgic person, and I was very close to my family growing up, and I feel like my grandmother, grandfather, great aunt, and great uncle, those 4 people were my grandmother and my great aunt were the sisters, right? The fearsome foursome did everything together, and I'd see them very often. I see these things and it feels like them to me. It feels like what they were experiencing at the time. Even in their own homes, I would tell you that it felt like each one of those houses, as charming as they were, and that's a good word for them, they stopped around 63, 64, right? They just decided that's where they were going to like end anything changing, and it just stayed in that place. So I love watching these older films because of how it connects me to what it might have been like to be them when they were young, something that I would have never had the privilege of seeing because I was negative 50-something years old. That's it, or more. But I think I would see them because I like the feeling that they evoke. Everything from a film like, Nancy Drew, this particular film, to many of the other old, like, black and whites. We've seen a lot of Cary Grant in the last year. We've gone to the Stanford Theater in Palo Alto to see some other really great holiday films that are from the 40s, 50s era. I think I would see it again just because I like how the films make me feel. Whatever they were doing back then to create that escapism, they did it really well. And I almost feel like they do it better than anything that I see now. Because when I'm watching this, I am sort of... this or anything from these eras, maybe these few decades, let's say 40 to 65 or something. I'm really sucked into that.
Well, here's the irony.
And I want to go to there.
Well, that's good. But here's the irony of it. These movies, because they didn't know television was coming, up until the 50s, they were made to be forgotten. Like, they were just quick, fun films. Unless you saw it in the theater, you were never going to see it. And ironically, the films being made now aren't being made for posterity.
They're being made for legacy.
Right, but they should be, because they know these films will live forever. And what the ironic part is, people are just kind of like, okay, yeah, this came out, I'm never going to remember it again. Whereas they're using today's technology to go back and watch older films over and over again because they were better made, even though ironically back then they weren't being made for posterity necessarily.
That's an excellent point. And you've made that so many times that it really has sunk in to me when I watch these older films and think
they had more of a craft. They would care about the craft.
A great example was, we would sometimes go see a film at the Stanford Theater. Is a great example because they only show older films. Like you can't go and watch
new films.
Iron Man there or whatever. So we would go and we would see these older films, and you'd ask me, an intermission between one film, because there's always a doubleheader, right? Between one film and then the next film. And then I'd say, I liked it, but there was this part of the plot line which didn't really wrap up with a bow for me and was a little confusing. And then every time I'd bring that up, you'd say, okay, point well taken. But the thing we need to remember is when these were made, they were made to be shown once and never really shown again.
Yeah.
So when you think about that's a valid excuse. It makes sense. It really does.
Really, the only studio that kind of that did the posterity was Disney, because they would re-release the films.
Yeah.
They were the only ones to do that. So
at the time, yeah.
Well, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you, Lindsay.
Oh, thanks for having me. Great conversation. I think it's worth checking out. I mean, again, it's another time. So when you watch these things, try to imagine that and let yourself think about how this might have actually been kind of edgy for that time.
Yeah, and do what I do. Use today's technology to watch old things.
Because they're pretty cool.
They are.
If you enjoy this podcast and are an iTunes user, please do the show a favor and head on over to the official iTunes page for Damn Good Movie Memories. Be sure to leave a rating and a review. This will allow the show to appear higher in the algorithm and spread the joy of this podcast to the masses. If you are not an iTunes user, you can still listen and subscribe on Podbean at damngoodmoviememories.podbean.com. Be sure to like us on Facebook under our Damn Good Movie Memories page. You can also listen to a limited number of episodes on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and be sure to tune in next week for an all-new episode of Damn Good Movie Memories.